Nikki Walker stood at the edge of the check-in counter, her fingers drumming lightly against the polished wood as the receptionist at the Nha Trang coastal resort typed furiously into her computer. The air was thick, with the scent of frangipani and sea salt, a stark contrast to the sterile office environment she'd left behind in New York. Her suitcase, a worn navy roller bag, rested by her feet, a silent companion to her decision to escape. She needed this trip 3 days, in Vietnam's sun-drenched paradise, to forget David, the man who'd spent 4 years, making her feel like an afterthought. His promises had been as fleeting as the jazz notes that used to fill their Harlem apartment, and when she finally walked away 3 months ago, she'd vowed to reclaim herself. The receptionist, a young woman with a bright smile, handed Nikki a keycard. "Room 305, Ms. Walker. Enjoy your stay." Nikki nodded, tucking a loose braid behind her ear. Her reflection in the glass behind the counter caught her eye. Tired, brown eyes, but a spark of determination beneath them. She wore a simple white sundress, the kind that felt like freedom after years of corporate blouses. This was her moment, a chance to breathe without the weight of a love that never loved her back. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor was quiet, save for the soft hum of the motor and the distant crash of waves through an open window. Nikki's phone buzzed in her pocket, a work email probably. She ignored it. This weekend was hers. Not the marketing firm's, not her boss's, not anyone's. The doors slid open, and she stepped into a hallway, lined with woven tapestries, depicting Vietnamese fishing villages. Room 305 was at the far end, its door a sleek mahogany panel that promised luxury. She swiped the keycard, the lock clicked, and she pushed the door open. The room was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the turquoise South China Sea, a king-sized bed draped in crisp white linens, and a faint scent of lemongrass lingering in the air. But Nikki's breath caught for a different reason. A man stood near the window, his back to her, wearing nothing but a white towel wrapped low around his hips. His shoulders were broad, his hair damp and tousled, and the faint outline of muscle suggested he wasn't just a desk-bound executive. A leather duffel bag sat on the chair, a navy blazer neatly folded beside it, and a trace of cologne, clean, expensive, with a hint of cedar, hung in the air. Nikki froze, her suitcase wheel squeaking to a halt on the tiled floor. Her heart thudded. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharper than intended. The man turned, and her stomach dropped. Christopher White. Her boss stared back at her, his green eyes wide with surprise. Water droplets still clung to his temple, catching the sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence, a stark contrast to the chaos in Nikki's mind. Ms. Walker, Christopher's voice was low, tinged with the same confusion she felt. "What are you doing here?" Nikki's mouth opened, then closed. Heat crept up her neck. She glanced at the key card in her hand, then back at the room number on the door. "Room 305, she said, holding up the card as if it could explain everything. "I booked it 2 weeks ago. They gave me this key." Christopher ran a hand through his damp hair, the towel shifting slightly as he stepped forward. "Same here. I checked in an hour ago." He glanced at his own key card on the bedside table, then back at her. "This is unexpected." Unexpected was an understatement. Nikki's mind raced. Christopher White, the billionaire CEO of Whitewave Enterprises, wasn't supposed to be here. At the office, he was a figure of quiet authority, always in tailored suits, his words sparse but deliberate. His presence commanded rooms, but he rarely lingered in them, his eyes always carrying a weight Nikki couldn't place. And now here he was, half naked, in what was supposed to be her sanctuary. "I'll call the front desk," she said quickly, fumbling for her phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed her eyes carefully, avoiding Christopher's bare chest. The receptionist's voice was apologetic but frazzled. "We're so sorry, Ms. Walker. There's been a system error. We're fully booked tonight, but we can move you to another room tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" Nikki's voice rose slightly. "You're saying I'm stuck here. We can offer a complimentary upgrade and a full refund for the inconvenience," the receptionist added. "Please bear with us." Nikki hung up her jaw tight. She looked at Christopher, who'd pulled on a white t-shirt from his bag, though the towel remained. "They're booked?" she said flatly. "No rooms until morning." He nodded, his expression unreadable, but calm. "That's inconvenient." He paused, glancing at the couch in the corner of the room. "I'll take the couch. You can have the bed." Nikki blinked. "You're serious?" "It's late," he said, his tone practical but not cold. "Dragging your bag back downstairs won't fix this. We'll sort it out in the morning." He hesitated, then added, "If you're uncomfortable, I'll go with you to the lobby." She should say no. She should march downstairs, demand a solution, or book another hotel entirely. But the thought of navigating a foreign city at night, jet-lagged and emotionally raw, made her shoulders sag. And if she was honest, a small part of her, a part she wasn't ready to examine, didn't want to leave just yet. Not because of attraction, but because Christopher's calm demeanor felt oddly grounding, a stark contrast to David's chaos. "Okay," she said finally, her voice softer. "Just for tonight." Christopher nodded, grabbing a pair of sweatpants from his bag and heading to the bathroom to change. Nikki set her suitcase by the bed, her movements mechanical. This was not how her healing weekend was supposed to start. She'd come to Nha Trang to forget David, to let go of the man who'd made her feel invisible, who'd dismissed her dreams of writing poetry and building a life that felt like hers. 4 years of waiting for him to choose her had left scars she was only beginning to understand. And now she was sharing a room with her boss, a man who barely spoke in meetings, but whose presence always lingered in her peripheral vision. When Christopher emerged fully dressed, he settled onto the couch with a tablet, scrolling through what looked like emails. Nikki changed into her pajamas, a loose cotton shirt and shorts, in the bathroom, her movements quick and deliberate. When she returned, the bed was neatly made, one side turned down, and a glass of water sat on the nightstand. She glanced at Christopher, who didn't look up. "You can sleep," he said, his voice steady. "I've got some work to finish." She nodded, climbing into bed and pulling the covers up. The sheets were cool against her skin, the room quiet except for the distant sound of waves. Her heart still raced, but not from panic anymore. It was something else. Curiosity maybe, or the strange comfort of sharing space with someone who didn't demand anything from her. As she stared at the ceiling, Christopher's voice broke the silence, soft but clear. "Do you ever wonder if people know the weight of the hurt they leave behind?" Nikki turned her head toward him. He was still on the couch, his tablet forgotten, his eyes fixed on the window. The question wasn't what she'd expected from Christopher White, the man who seemed to carry the world with ease. "I think some do," she said carefully, sitting up slightly. "But others, they just walk away, and you're left carrying it." He nodded, his expression distant. "I came here to forget someone too." The words hung in the air, raw and unguarded. Nikki's breath caught. For the first time, she saw him not as her boss, but as a man with his own ghosts. And in that moment, room 305 felt less like a mistake and more like the beginning of something neither of them could have planned. The moonlight spilled through the wide windows of room 305, casting silver patterns across the polished floor of the Nha Trang resort. Nikki lay in the king-sized bed, the sheets crisp against her skin, but sleep remained elusive. The distant rhythm of the waves outside was soothing, yet her mind churned with the weight of Christopher's words from earlier. I came here to forget someone too. The confession lingered like a half-finished melody, both intimate and incomplete. She glanced toward the couch where Christopher sat, his silhouette outlined by the soft glow of his tablet. He hadn't moved in nearly an hour, his focus seemingly on work, though his stillness suggested something heavier. Nikki shifted, propping herself up on one elbow. The quiet between them wasn't awkward anymore, but it carried a charge like the air before a storm. "You're not actually working, are you?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. Christopher looked up, his eyes catching hers in the dim light. A faint smile tugged at his lips, more self-aware than amused. "Caught me," he said, setting the tablet aside. "It's easier to stare at numbers than to think sometimes." He leaned back, one arm resting casually along the couch, but his posture betrayed a tension he couldn't quite hide. She sat up fully now, tucking her legs under the blanket. "What's keeping you up then?" The question was bold, more direct than she'd intended, but the night felt like a space where walls could come down, if only for a moment. He hesitated, his gaze drifting to the window, where the sea shimmered under the stars. "Memories," he said finally. "The kind that don't let go easily." He didn't elaborate, and Nikki didn't push, but the weight of his words stirred something in her, a recognition of her own ghosts. She thought of David's dismissive silences, the way he'd made her feel like her dreams were too small to matter. She'd come here to bury that pain. But Christopher's vulnerability was pulling it back to the surface, reframing it. "Do you ever feel like you're running from something, but you don't know what you're running toward?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Like you're trying to escape a version of yourself you don't want to be anymore." Christopher's eyes met hers again, sharper this time, as if she'd touched something he hadn't expected. "Every day," he said quietly. "I built a life that looks perfect on paper, meetings, deals, the corner office. But sometimes it feels like I'm just performing." He paused, his fingers tracing the edge of the couch. "I don't even know who I'm performing for anymore." Nikki nodded, her chest tightening. She knew that performance too well, the smile she'd worn to keep David happy, the extra hours at work to prove she was enough. "I used to think if I just tried harder, I could make someone see me," she said. "But it turns out the person I needed to see was myself." The words hung between them, raw and unguarded. Christopher leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And what do you see now?" he asked. She swallowed, caught off guard by the question. "Someone who's still figuring it out," she admitted, "but someone who's done waiting for permission to live." He nodded, a slow, thoughtful gesture. "That's more than most people get to." His voice was quiet, but there was a warmth in it, a recognition that felt like a bridge between them. For a moment, they were no longer just colleagues, caught in a hotel mishap. They were two people sharing a truth neither had spoken aloud before. The silence that followed was different, less heavy, more like a pause in a conversation that wasn't ready to end. Nikki glanced at the clock on the nightstand, 1:17 a.m. She should sleep, but the idea of closing her eyes felt like surrendering this moment. Instead, she slid out of bed, her bare feet cool against the tiles, and walked to the minibar. "Want something?" she asked, pulling out a bottle of sparkling water. Christopher raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement breaking through his usual reserve. "You're offering me my own minibar stash?" She laughed, the sound surprising her. "Consider it my room for the night. I'm being generous." She tossed him a bottle, and he caught it with ease, his smile widening. It was the first time she'd seen him smile like that, not the polite professional one he used in boardrooms, but something real, unguarded. They sat across from each other, her on the edge of the bed, Him on the couch, sipping sparkling water, like it was a ritual. "Tell me something about you," Nikki said, emboldened by the late hour, something nobody at the office would guess. He tilted his head, considering. "I'm terrible at karaoke," he said finally. "Tried it once in college, butchered a Springsteen song so badly the bar cleared out." Nikki's laughter spilled out louder this time. "You karaoke, I can't picture it." "Good," he said, his eyes glinting with mock offense. "I've spent years burying that memory." He took a sip, then turned the question back on her. "Your turn." She thought for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of the bottle. "I used to write poetry," she said. "Not the kind you show people, just words I'd scribble on napkins or in the margins of notebooks. It was how I made sense of things." "Do you still write?" he asked, his voice gentle, like he knew the question might carry weight. She shook her head. "Not lately. Life got loud." She didn't mention David, but the shadow of him was there in the way he'd dismissed her writing as a cute hobby. She pushed the thought away. "Maybe I'll start again." "You should," Christopher said, his tone earnest. "The world could use more of what you see." The compliment landed softly, but it stirred something in her, a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just the CEO who signed her paychecks, but a man who carried his own quiet battles. The room felt smaller now, the space between them charged with possibility. A soft knock at the door broke the moment. Nikki tensed, glancing at Christopher, who stood and crossed the room. It was a hotel staff member, apologetic and holding a new keycard, Miss Walker. "We've secured a room for you on the 5th floor, available now. We're terribly sorry for the mix-up." Nikki took the card, her fingers brushing the cool plastic. She should feel relieved, but instead, a strange reluctance settled in her chest. She glanced at Christopher, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. "Thank you," she said to the staff member, who nodded and left. She turned to Christopher. "I guess I should—" "You don't have to," he said quickly, then caught himself. "I mean, it's your call. But if you're okay here, I'm okay with it." His voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes, a question he wasn't asking aloud. Nikki hesitated, the keycard heavy in her hand. The safe choice was to take the new room, to draw a line between them before anything blurred further. But something about the way he looked at her, like he saw her, not just the employee, but the woman who'd spent years hiding, made her pause. "I'll stay," she said, finally setting the keycard on the table. "Just until morning." Christopher nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "Good," he said softly. "I'll keep the couch." As Nikki climbed back into bed, the moonlight still dancing across the room, she felt a shift. Room 305 wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a space where two people, both running from their pasts, might just find something worth staying for. The morning sun poured into room 305, painting the walls with a golden glow that softened the edges of the previous night's revelations. Nikki stirred beneath the sheets, the faint scent of lemongrass still lingering in the air of the Nha Trang resort. The couch where Christopher had slept was empty, the blanket folded neatly at one end. A paper cup of coffee sat on the nightstand, steam curling from its lid, alongside a handwritten note. "Stepped out to clear my head. Coffee's fresh. See." Nikki smiled, the careful slant of his handwriting oddly comforting. She stretched her bare feet, brushing the cool tiles, and reached for the cup, savoring its warmth against her palms. The night's conversation replayed in her mind, not just Christopher's confession about running from memories, but the way he'd listened when she spoke of her own buried dreams. It wasn't the kind of connection she'd expected, not here, not with him. She sipped the coffee, its bitterness grounding her, and glanced at the new keycard still resting on the table. She hadn't used it, hadn't wanted to. Staying in this room with its accidental intimacy felt like a choice to step toward something new, even if she couldn't name it yet. The door clicked open and Christopher stepped inside, his hair slightly tousled from the morning breeze. He wore a linen shirt, sleeves rolled up, and carried a small paper bag. "Morning," he said, his voice warm, but tinged with a trace of hesitation, as if he wasn't sure where they stood after last night. "I got us some banh mi from a stall down the street. Thought you might be hungry." Nikki raised an eyebrow, setting the coffee down. "You went out for breakfast. Didn't peg you for the street food type." He grinned, a rare flash of playfulness that softened his usual composure. "I'm full of surprises." He set the bag on the table, pulling out 2 sandwiches wrapped in parchment, their crusty exteriors promising fresh herbs and savory fillings. "Hope you like pork and pâté." She joined him at the small table by the window, the sea sparkling beyond the glass. They ate in companionable silence. At first, the crunch of bread and the tang of pickled carrots filling the space. But the quiet wasn't empty. It felt like a continuation of their late-night honesty, a bridge they were still building. Nikki glanced at him, noticing the way his fingers paused over the sandwich, as if his thoughts were elsewhere. So she said, breaking the silence, "What's the plan? We call the front desk, sort out the room mess, and go back to being whatever we are at the office." Christopher leaned back, his eyes meeting hers. "Is that what you want?" His tone was careful, not pressing, but genuinely curious. She hesitated, the question catching her off guard. What did she want? This trip was supposed to be about healing, about letting go of the past. But sitting here sharing breakfast with a man who'd seen her in a way few others, had she felt a pull towards something more? "I don't know," she admitted, her voice soft. "But I don't think I'm ready to just walk away from this." She gestured vaguely at the space between them. He nodded, as if her answer made sense. "Then let's not go back yet," he said. "The front desk can wait. How about we get out of this room for a bit? See what Nha Trang has to offer." Nikki blinked, surprised by the suggestion. "You want to play tourist with me?" "Why not?" he said, his smile returning. "Unless you'd rather stay cooped up here with my terrible karaoke stories." She laughed, the sound easing the tension in her chest. "Okay, you win, but I'm holding you to that full of surprises claim." An hour later, they were on a wooden boat slicing through the turquoise waters of Nha Trang Bay, the salty breeze tugging at Nikki's sundress. Christopher had arranged the outing with a local guide, a wiry man named Min, who pointed out distant islands with a grin. The boat rocked gently, and Nikki leaned against the railing, watching the horizon where the sea met the sky. Christopher stood beside her, his shoulder brushing hers as the boat swayed. "This place is unreal," she said, shielding her eyes from the sun. "I read about it, but seeing it, it's different." Christopher nodded, his gaze fixed on the water. "It's like it demands you to be present. No room for anything else." He paused, then added, "I haven't felt that in a long time." She turned to him, catching the weight behind his words. Because of her, she asked gently, not needing to name the woman he'd mentioned last night. He didn't answer right away, his hands gripping the railing. "Yeah," he said finally. "Emma was..." She had this way of making every moment feel like it mattered. "I didn't appreciate it until it was gone." His voice was steady, but there was a crack in it, a fracture he didn't try to hide. Nikki felt a pang of empathy. She knew that kind of loss, not the same, but close enough. "I get it," she said. "The person I was with." He made me feel like I was chasing something I'd never catch, like I wasn't enough. She looked out at the water, the words spilling out before she could stop them. But being here away from all that, it's like I'm remembering who I am. Christopher turned to her, his eyes searching. And who's that? She smiled a little wistful. Someone who wants to laugh without checking if it's okay first. Someone who's done apologizing for taking up space. He didn't say anything, but the way he looked at her, like he saw every word she wasn't saying, made her heart skip. The boat docked at a small island, and Min led them to a secluded beach where the sand was soft as powder. They kicked off their shoes, the grains warm beneath their feet, and wandered toward a cluster of rocks where waves crashed in a gentle rhythm. "Tell me something else," Nikki said, picking up a smooth pebble and turning it over in her hand. "Something you don't tell people." Christopher crouched beside her, picking up his own pebble and tossing it into the surf. "I'm afraid of heights," he said, his tone light but honest. "Climbed a ladder once to fix a light bulb, nearly passed out." She laughed, the image of him, the unflappable CEO, wobbling on a ladder, too absurd to resist. "You're kidding. How do you survive skyscraper offices?" "Barely," he said, grinning. "Your turn." She thought for a moment, then said, "I used to dream of opening a little bookstore. Not a big one, just a place with poetry readings and mismatched chairs. Somewhere people could feel seen." He looked at her, his expression softening. "That sounds like a place I'd visit." The words were simple, but they landed with weight, stirring something in Nikki she wasn't ready to name. They spent the afternoon exploring the island, sharing stories of small rebellions. Her sneaking into jazz clubs as a teenager, him skipping board meetings to watch old action movies. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, and as they headed back to the boat, Nikki felt lighter, like the weight of the past was loosening its grip. Back at the resort, the front desk confirmed a new room for Nikki, but as she held the key card, she looked at Christopher, his quiet presence steady beside her. "One more night in 305, she asked, half joking. He smiled, a spark in his eyes. "If you're sure." She was, and as they walked back to the room, the sea whispering outside, Nikki knew something had shifted, not just between them, but within her. This wasn't just a getaway anymore. It was a beginning. The evening air in Nha Trang carried a gentle warmth, laced with the salty tang of the sea and the faint hum of cicadas. Nikki stood on the balcony of room 305, her hands resting on the smooth railing, as she gazed at the city's lights, twinkling against the darkening sky. The resort's glow reflected off the water below, a mirror of stars that felt both distant and impossibly close. Inside the room was quiet, save for the soft clink of Christopher setting down a glass in the small kitchenette. Their day on the island, laughing over shared stories, wandering barefoot on the beach, had left a lingering ease between them, but also a question neither had voiced: what came next? Nikki turned as Christopher stepped onto the balcony, 2 bottles of chilled passion fruit juice in hand. He offered her one, his fingers brushing hers briefly, a touch that sent a quiet spark through her. "Thought we could use something sweeter than coffee tonight," he said, his voice light, but carrying a trace of something deeper, like he was testing the waters. She took the bottle, her lips curving into a smile. "You're getting good at this whole spontaneous thing," she teased, twisting off the cap. "First banh mi, now this. What's next? A midnight swim?" His eyes lit up, a glint of mischief she hadn't seen before. "Don't tempt me," he said, leaning against the railing beside her, "though I'd probably trip over a seashell and ruin the moment." Nikki laughed, the sound blending with the distant crash of waves. She liked this side of him, playful, unguarded, a far cry from the man who navigated boardrooms with unshakable calm. But beneath the lightness, she sensed a current of hesitation, as if he too was grappling with the shift between them. The room mixed up the late-night confessions, the day spent exploring. They'd built something fragile but real, and now it demanded a choice. She sipped her juice, the tart sweetness grounding her. "So," she said, her tone softer, "we've got one more night before reality kicks in. What do we do with it?" Christopher didn't answer right away. He looked out at the sea, his expression thoughtful, as if weighing something heavy. "I've been thinking about that all day," he admitted, turning to face her. Whatever this is, it's not what I expected when I booked this trip. But I don't want it to end when we leave this room." Her heart quickened, not from surprise, but from the clarity in his words. She'd felt it too, the pull of something more than a fleeting moment. But doubt lingered, a shadow cast by years of guarding herself. "It's complicated, isn't it?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're you, and I'm me. Back in New York, there are rules, expectations." He nodded, his gaze steady. "I know. But rules don't change how I feel when I'm with you." He paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. "Last night, when you talked about wanting to live without apologizing for it, I felt like I was seeing you for the first time, and I didn't want to look away." Nikki's breath caught. His honesty was disarming, stripping away the layers she'd built to protect herself. She wanted to say something to match his courage, but the words felt tangled. Instead, she set her juice down and stepped closer, the balcony's narrow space shrinking the world to just them. "I'm scared," she admitted, her eyes meeting his. "Not of you, but of what this could mean. I've spent so long rebuilding myself. I don't know if I'm ready to let someone in again." He didn't flinch, didn't look away. "I'm scared too," he said. "I've spent years keeping people at arm's length because it was easier than risking hurt again. But you make me want to try." The air between them felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Nikki's pulse raced, not from fear, but from the possibility of stepping into something real. She thought of the poetry she used to write, the way words could capture a feeling too big for the page. This moment felt like that, a truth too big to contain. "Then let's try," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "But not here, not just in this room. Let's do something real, something that's ours." Christopher's eyes softened, a mix of relief and resolve. "Name it." She glanced at the city beyond the balcony, its lights pulsing with life. "There's a night market down by the pier. I read about it before I came. It's supposed to be chaotic, full of music and food stalls. Let's go. No plans, no pretenses, just us." He didn't hesitate. "Deal." Half an hour later, they were weaving through the bustling night market, the air thick with the scents of grilled squid, lemongrass, and fried dough. Stalls lined the narrow street, their colorful awnings draped with fairy lights. Vendors called out in rapid Vietnamese, offering skewers of meat and handmade trinkets. Nikki paused at a stall selling woven bracelets, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns. "My grandmother used to make things like this," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. She'd sit on her porch humming old songs, weaving stories into every knot. Christopher watched her, his expression soft. "You should tell me one of those stories sometime." She smiled, picking up a bracelet with tiny blue beads. "Maybe I will." She slipped it onto her wrist, and when the vendor quoted a price, Christopher handed over a few bills before she could protest. "You didn't have to," she said, but her smile betrayed her gratitude. "I wanted to," he replied simply, and they moved on, the crowd swirling around them. They shared a plate of crispy bonseo, laughing when Christopher fumbled with the chopsticks, a smear of fish sauce on his chin. Nikki reached out, wiping it away with a napkin, her touch lingering a moment longer than necessary. His eyes met hers, and for a second, the market's chaos faded, leaving only the warmth of their connection. As they wandered toward the pier, a street band struck up a lively tune, the strum of a danbao mingling with the beat of a drum. Couples and families danced in the open space, their movements free and unself-conscious. Nikki felt a tug of impulse. "Come on," she said, grabbing Christopher's hand and pulling him into the crowd. He laughed, a sound so unguarded it caught her off guard. "I'm a terrible dancer," he warned, but he followed her lead, his steps clumsy but willing. They swayed to the music, her hand in his, the rhythm guiding them closer. The world felt alive, vibrant, and for the first time in years, Nikki didn't feel like she was chasing something out of reach. She was here now with him. As the song ended, they stopped breathless and laughing, their hands still clasped. The crowd applauded the band, but Christopher's eyes were on her, steady and sure. "I meant what I said," he murmured, his voice almost lost in the noise. "I don't want this to end." Nikki's heart pounded, not from the dance, but from the weight of his words. She squeezed his hand, a silent promise. "Then let's keep going," she said. They walked back to the resort under a sky studded with stars, the night market's energy still buzzing in their veins. Room 305 waited, no longer a mistake, but a space where they'd chosen each other. And as they stepped inside the door, clicking shut behind them, Nikki knew this was no longer about forgetting the past. It was about building something new. The late morning sun hung high over Nha Trang, its rays glinting off the waves that lapped against the shore. Nikki sat at a small table outside a beachside cafe, the scent of roasted coffee mingling with the salty breeze. Her phone rested face up on the table, a single message from David glowing on the screen. "I'm in Nha Trang. Can we talk? Just 10 minutes. The words stirred a knot in her stomach, not of longing, but of unease. She hadn't responded yet, but the message felt like a tether to a life she'd fought to leave behind. Across from her, the sea stretched endless and blue, a reminder of the freedom she'd tasted over the past 2 days with Christopher. She glanced back toward the resort where Christopher was handling a quick call with his team in New York. Their night at the market, dancing under fairy lights, sharing laughter over spilled fish sauce, had left her feeling lighter than she had in years. But David's message was a shadow, a test of whether she was truly ready to move forward. She took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the phone, and typed a reply. "Okay. Café Loc Fat, 11 a.m. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The cafe was alive with the hum of conversation, locals and tourists, mingling over iced coffees and plates of fresh fruit. Nikki sipped her café suada, the sweet condensed milk grounding her as she waited. She'd chosen a table near the edge of the patio, where the view of the beach could keep her steady. The past 2 days with Christopher had shown her a version of herself she'd almost forgotten, one who laughed freely, who didn't shrink from her own desires. But closure with David wasn't just about him. It was about proving to herself that she could let go. At exactly 11:03, David appeared, weaving through the crowd. He hadn't changed much, still the same tousled hair, the same leather jacket he wore like a shield. But his eyes carried a weariness she didn't recognize, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. He spotted her and offered a tentative smile, pulling out the chair across from her. "Hey, Nikki," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. "Thanks for meeting me." She nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "You said you wanted to talk, so talk." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table as if searching for the right words. "I've been thinking about you," he said, "about us. I know I messed up, and I'm not here to make excuses. but seeing you in my feed posting about this trip, it hit me. I lost something real." Nikki's fingers tightened around her glass, the cold seeping into her skin. His words were familiar, echoing promises he'd made before, always too late, always too vague. "What do you want, David?" she asked, her voice steady but sharp. "Because I'm not the same person who waited for you to figure it out." He flinched but didn't look away. "I know," he said. "I was selfish. I thought I could keep you without giving you what you deserved. But I've been working on my self-therapy the whole deal. I just needed to see you to say I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air, heavy but hollow. Nikki studied him, searching for the pull she used to feel the ache that had kept her tethered to him for years. But it wasn't there. Instead, she felt a quiet clarity, like a fog lifting. "I appreciate that," she said, her tone measured. "But apologies don't change the past. They don't change who we were together." David's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Is there someone else?" He asked, his voice low, almost resigned. Nikki hesitated, not because she doubted her feelings for Christopher, but because this moment wasn't about him. "This isn't about someone else," she said. "It's about me. I spent years trying to be enough for you, and I lost sight of what I wanted. I'm done with that." He looked down, his fingers tracing the edge of the table. "I didn't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I just needed to say it, and to see you one last time, to know you're okay." "I'm more than okay," she said, and the words felt true, solid. "I'm finding my way." She stood, smoothing her sundress, and offered a small final smile. "Take care, David." He nodded, his eyes lingering on her for a moment, before he stood too. "You too, Nikki." He walked away, his silhouette swallowed by the crowd, and for the first time, Nikki felt no urge to call him back. The knot in her stomach unraveled, replaced by a lightness that made her steps feel sure as she left the cafe. Back at the resort, she found Christopher on the beach, standing where the waves kissed the sand. He'd changed into a loose shirt and shorts, his feet bare, a far cry from the polished CEO she knew. He turned as she approached, his expression softening. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice carrying a quiet concern. She nodded, stopping beside him. The tide lapped at her toes, cool and grounding. "I saw him," she said. "David." I needed to close that door for good. Christopher didn't ask for details, but his eyes searched hers, patient and steady. And I did," she said, her voice firm. "I told him, I'm done waiting for someone else's version of my life." She paused, the weight of her decision settling in. "I want to build something new, something that's mine." He smiled, a slow, genuine curve that made her heart skip. "I'm glad," he said. "You deserve that." They stood there, the sea stretching before them, its rhythm a quiet companion to their silence. Nikki felt a surge of courage, not just from closing the chapter with David, but from the possibility standing beside her. "You know," she said, turning to him, "I've been thinking about what you said last night. About trying. I want that too, but I need to know it's real, not just a moment we'll forget when we're back in New York." Christopher's expression grew serious but not guarded. "It's real," he said. "I don't know what it looks like yet, but I know I want to find out. With you." Her breath caught, not from doubt, but from the certainty in his voice. She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, the contact both bold and gentle. "Then let's find out," she said, her smile mirroring his. They walked along the shore, the sand soft beneath their feet, the future uncertain, but no longer daunting. The resort loomed behind them, room 305, a quiet witness to the shift between them. As the sun climbed higher, casting their shadows long and tangled, Nikki felt a truth take root. This wasn't just about leaving the past behind. It was about choosing a path forward hand in hand with someone who saw her as she was. The midday sun hung heavy over Nha Trang, its warmth seeping through the open windows of room 305 as Nikki packed her suitcase. The resort's tranquil hum, distant waves, the soft clatter of staff preparing for new guests felt like a fading melody. Her sundress swayed as she folded a scarf, her movements deliberate, but tinged with reluctance. The past 2 days with Christopher had been a whirlwind of laughter, shared secrets, and a quiet promise to explore what lay between them. But now, with their flight back to New York looming, the reality of their lives, work expectations, boundaries loomed larger. Christopher stood by the window, his silhouette framed against the turquoise sea. He'd traded his casual beach attire for a crisp button-down, though the sleeves were rolled up, a nod to the ease they'd found here. He held a small seashell, turning it over in his hand, his expression distant. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" he said, glancing at her. "Leaving this place knowing everything's about to change." Nikki zipped her suitcase, her fingers pausing on the handle. "Yeah," she said, her voice soft. "It's like we built something here, but now we have to see if it holds up out there." She gestured vaguely toward the world beyond the resort, where office politics and professional lines waited. He nodded, setting the seashell on the windowsill. "It will," he said, his tone firm, but not forceful. "If we want it to." She met his gaze, her heart catching at the certainty in his eyes. The night market, the beach walk, the moment she'd chosen to stay in this room, they'd all been steps toward something real. But the weight of their roles, him as CEO and her as his employee, pressed against her thoughts. "It's not just about wanting it," she said. "There's the office, the rules. People will talk." "Let them," he said, stepping closer. "I'm not saying it'll be easy, but I'm not hiding how I feel about you. Not after this." Nikki's breath hitched, not from doubt, but from the boldness of his words. She wanted to believe they could carry this connection back to New York, but a part of her, the part that had learned to protect herself, braced for complications. "Okay," she said finally, a small smile breaking through. "But we take it one step at a time." He returned her smile, a quiet agreement. One step at a time. The flight back was a blur of recycled air and flickering screens. Nikki sat beside Christopher in business class, their shoulders brushing as they shared a pair of earbuds, listening to a jazz playlist she'd curated. The music, soulful and unhurried, felt like an echo of their time in Nha Trang. He didn't talk much, but his presence was steady, a reminder of the promise they'd made. When the plane landed at JFK, the city's gray skyline felt jarring after Vietnam's vibrant hues, a stark reminder of the world they were re-entering. At White Wave Enterprises Monday morning brought a familiar rhythm, ringing phones, the clatter of keyboards, the hum of ambition. Nikki settled at her desk in the marketing department, her inbox already overflowing. She'd barely opened her first email when a colleague, Sarah, leaned over the cubicle divider, her voice low. "So, how was Vietnam? Heard you and the boss had quite the trip." Nikki's fingers froze on the keyboard. The words were casual, but the implication wasn't. She forced a smile, keeping her tone light. "It was a work trip that turned into a vacation. Hotel messed up the rooms, but we sorted it out." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her smile teasing. "Sorted it out, huh? Must have been cozy." She winked and walked away, leaving Nikki with a knot in her stomach. The office grapevine was already buzzing, and she hadn't even seen Christopher yet. By midday, she was called to a meeting with the HR manager, Lisa, a no-nonsense woman with a knack for cutting through pleasantries. The office was stark, all glass and steel, a far cry from the warmth of room 305. Lisa gestured for Nikki to sit, her expression neutral but probing. "I received an anonymous email this morning." She began folding her hands. It suggested a personal relationship between you and Christopher White during your trip. Care to clarify? Nikki's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. There was a booking error at the resort. We were assigned the same room by mistake. Nothing inappropriate happened. The lie wasn't entirely true, not in the way her heart had shifted, but she wasn't ready to dissect her feelings in an HR office. Lisa nodded, her eyes searching. I'm not accusing you, Nikki, but given Christopher's position, we need transparency. If there's a relationship, it has to be disclosed to avoid any perception of favoritism. Nikki swallowed the weight of the situation settling in. I understand, she said. There's nothing to disclose right now. The words felt like a betrayal, not of Lisa, but of the truth she and Christopher were just beginning to explore. Back at her desk, Nikki stared at her computer screen, the words blurring. She hadn't expected the office to feel so suffocating so soon. Her phone buzzed with a text from Christopher Lunch, Rooftop, 1 p.m. She glanced at the clock, 12:47, and typed a quick, "See you there." The rooftop was a quiet oasis above the city, a small garden space with potted plants and a view of the skyline. Christopher was already there, leaning against the railing, a takeout bag from a nearby deli at his side. He looked up as she approached, his expression softening. Rough morning, he asked, reading her face. She sighed, sitting on a bench beside him. You could say that. HR got an anonymous email about us. They're already asking questions. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. I got a similar call. Someone's quick to stir the pot. He handed her a sandwich, turkey and avocado, her favorite, a detail he'd remembered from a team lunch months ago. I told them the truth. It was a hotel error. But I also said I'd step back from overseeing your department, if it comes to that. Nikki paused the sandwich halfway to her mouth. You'd do that. Just like that. He met her gaze, unflinching. If it means protecting what we're building, yes. I'm not playing games, Nikki. I meant what I said in Nha Trang. Her chest warmed, but doubt lingered. What if it's too much, the whispers, the rules, the way people will look at us? He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. People will always talk, but I'd rather face that than walk away from this, from you. His voice was quiet, but the conviction in it cut through her hesitation. She set the sandwich down, her fingers brushing his briefly. I don't want to walk away either, she said. But I need to know we're in this together no matter what comes next. We are, he said, his hand covering hers for a moment, a gesture both grounding and bold. One step at a time, remember. Nikki nodded, a smile breaking through her worry. The rooftop felt like a small rebellion, a space where they could be themselves, even if just for a lunch break. As they ate the city sprawling below, she felt a quiet resolve take root. The whispers and rules could wait, for now they had this moment, and it was enough to keep moving forward. The train rattled along the tracks, its rhythm a steady counterpoint to the thoughts swirling in Nikki's mind. She sat by the window, watching the blur of suburban houses and autumn trees as she headed to her mother's home just outside New York City. The weekend had arrived like a lifeline after a tense week at Whitewave Enterprises, where whispers about her and Christopher had grown louder, fueled by the anonymous email to HR. The office felt like a minefield, every glance and hushed conversation a reminder of the scrutiny they faced. Nikki clutched her phone, its screen dark, and let her head rest against the cool glass. She needed perspective, and no one offered that better than her mother. The house came into view as the taxi pulled up, a modest 2-story with a sagging porch and a garden overgrown with late-season roses. The wind chimes clinked softly, their familiar melody tugging at Nikki's heart. She stepped out, her boots crunching on the gravel path, and inhaled the crisp air, heavy with the scent of damp earth. The front door swung open before she could knock, and her mother Clara stood there, her apron dusted with flour, her smile warm, but knowing. "Got here just in time," Clara said, pulling Nikki into a hug that smelled of lavender and home. "I'm baking cornbread." "You hungry?" Nikki laughed, the tension in her shoulders easing. "Always." She followed her mother inside the kitchen, a cozy haven of worn wooden cabinets and a radio, humming an old jazz tune. They sat at the table, a plate of warm cornbread between them, and for a while they talked about small things. The neighbor's new dog, the leak in the roof, the way the roses refused to quit blooming. But Clara's eyes, sharp and patient, missed nothing. "All right, baby," she said, pouring tea into chipped mugs. "What's got you so quiet?" "This isn't just a visit to eat my cooking." Nikki traced the rim of her mug, the steam curling upward. She'd always been able to tell her mother anything, but this felt different, bigger, messier. "I think I'm falling for someone," she said finally, her voice low. "But it's complicated. He's my boss, and people at work are already talking. I'm scared I'm risking everything I've built." Clara leaned back, stirring her tea with a slow, deliberate motion. "Sounds like you're carrying a lot," she said. "Tell me about him." "Not the boss part, the man." Nikki smiled despite herself. "He's quiet, but not cold. He listens. Really listens, like he sees parts of me I forgot were there. He's not afraid to be honest, even when it's hard. And he makes me laugh, Mom, in a way I haven't in years." She paused, her fingers tightening around the mug. "But the office, the rules, it's like the world's waiting to pull us apart." Clara nodded, her expression soft but steady. "You know your father and I met at work. He was the maintenance guy, always fixing things nobody else noticed. I was at the front desk, smiling for everyone but myself. People talked, said it wasn't proper, said we were asking for trouble. But love doesn't care about proper, Nikki. It cares about what's true." Nikki's throat tightened, her mother's words stirring memories of her parents' quiet, unshakable bond. "What if it's too hard?" she asked. "What if I lose my job? My reputation?" Clara reached across the table, her hand warm over Nikki's. "The question isn't whether it's hard, it's whether he's worth it. Does he stand with you? Not just when it's easy, but when it's messy." Nikki thought of Christopher on the rooftop, his hand steady over hers, as he promised they'd face the whispers together. "Yeah," she said softly. "He does." "Then hold on to that," Clara said. "The world will always have opinions, but your heart, that's yours to follow." That night, Nikki lay in her childhood bedroom, the ceiling still dotted with glow-in-the-dark stars she'd stuck up as a kid. She opened her laptop, the screen casting a soft glow, and began typing, not an email, but a letter to herself. She wrote about the woman she'd been, the one who'd dimmed her light to fit someone else's shadow. She wrote about the fear that still lingered, the fear of being seen and judged. And then she wrote about the woman she was becoming, someone brave enough to choose a love that scared her, because it also made her feel alive. By Monday, Nikki stepped off the elevator at White Wave with a new steadiness in her chest. The office buzzed with its usual energy, but the whispers felt less sharp, less personal. She caught Sarah's eye across the room and offered a nod, refusing to shrink. At her desk, she found a sticky note tucked under her keyboard. "Coffee later, C." Her lips curved, a quiet warmth spreading through her. Mid-morning, Christopher appeared at her cubicle, his presence drawing a few curious glances. "Got a minute?" he asked, his tone professional, but warm. She followed him to a quiet conference room, where he closed the door, the glass walls offering little privacy but enough distance from the hum of the office. "HR called me again," he said, leaning against the table. "They're pushing for a formal disclosure if we're moving forward. I told them I'd step back from your department to keep things clean, Nikki's stomach twisted, but she nodded. I got the same talk. It's a lot. He studied her, his eyes searching. Is it too much? She took a breath, her mother's words echoing in her mind. No, she said, it's not. But I need to know we're on the same page. This isn't just about dodging HR. It's about building something real. Christopher stepped closer, his voice low. I want that. Not just here, but out there. Dinners, walks, moments that don't have to hide. I'm all in, Nikki, if you are. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the clarity of her own resolve. I'm in, she said, her smile small, but sure. But we do this right. We disclose, we face the noise, and we don't let it define us. He nodded, a flicker of relief in his eyes. Agreed. I'll set up a meeting with HR tomorrow. We'll lay it all out. As they left the conference room, Nikki felt the weight of curious stares, but they didn't sting like before. She glanced at Christopher, his stride steady beside her, and felt a quiet strength. The office was just a place, its rules, just lines on paper. What mattered was the choice they were making, to face the world together, messy as it might be. That evening, Nikki stood on her apartment balcony, the city's lights sprawling below. Her phone buzzed with a text from Christopher. Found a jazz club near you. Friday night. She smiled, typing back, You're on. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, uncertainty felt like possibility, not fear. And as the city hummed around her, Nikki knew she was ready to write the next chapter, not alone, but with someone who saw her as she was. The fluorescent lights of Whitewave Enterprises buzzed softly overhead as Nikki sat in the conference room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across the table, Lisa from HR reviewed a stack of papers, her pen tapping rhythmically against the glass surface. Christopher sat beside Nikki, his posture calm, but his jaw set a subtle sign of the tension he carried. They'd just signed the disclosure forms formalizing their relationship with the company and agreeing to Christopher's reassignment from overseeing Nikki's department. The air felt heavy, not with conflict, but with the weight of a decision that would ripple through their lives. Lisa looked up, her expression professional, but not unkind. This is straightforward, she said, sliding the forms into a folder. No further action is needed as long as you both adhere to the guidelines. Christopher. Your transition to the strategic planning team starts next week. Nikki, your reporting structure will shift to Elena in marketing. Nikki nodded, her throat tight. The process was clinical, but the implications weren't. She'd overheard the whispers in the break room, speculation about favoritism, raised eyebrows at their quick meeting on the rooftop. But sitting here with Christopher's steady presence beside her, she felt a resolve she hadn't expected. Thank you, she said, her voice clear. We appreciate the clarity. Lisa offered a small smile. You're handling this well. Most don't. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting, and Nikki and Christopher followed suit, stepping into the hallway, where the office hum resumed its relentless pace. Outside the glass-walled conference room, Nikki exhaled, the tension in her shoulders loosening slightly. That wasn't as bad as I thought, she said, glancing at Christopher. He gave her a sidelong look, a hint of a smile breaking through. You sound surprised. Did you expect a firing squad? She laughed, the sound easing the knot in her chest. Maybe a little, but we're through it, right? For now, he said, his tone sobering. People will still talk. You okay with that? She met his gaze, her mother's words echoing in her mind. Love doesn't care about proper. It cares about what's true. I'm okay, she said, as long as we're in this together. He reached for her hand, a brief, subtle touch that grounded her. We are. The rest of the day passed in a blur of emails and meetings, but the office felt different now, like a space they were navigating as a team. Nikki caught Sarah's curious glance during a team huddle, but met it with a calm nod, refusing to shrink. By late afternoon, she was packing up when her phone buzzed with a new message, not from Christopher, but an unknown number. "This is Lily, Emma's sister. I need to talk to Christopher. Can you pass this on? It's important." Nikki's heart skipped the name Emma, stirring a memory of Christopher's late-night confession in Nha Trang. She forwarded the message to him, adding, "Just got this. You okay?" His reply came quickly. "Thanks for the heads up. I'll call her. Meet me at my place tonight, 7 p.m. She typed back a quick yes and headed home, a mix of curiosity and unease settling in her chest. Christopher's apartment was a sleek loft in Manhattan, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows, but warmed by small touches. A stack of well-worn books, a vinyl record player in the corner. When Nikki arrived, he was already there, pacing slightly, a phone pressed to his ear. He waved her in his expression, tense, but softening at the sight of her. She set her bag down, giving him space as he finished the call. "Okay, Lily," he said, his voice low. "I'll be there tomorrow. Thanks for reaching out." He hung up, running a hand through his hair, and turned to Nikki. "Sorry about that. Lily, she has something from Emma. Wants me to come by her place in Brooklyn." Nikki sat on the couch, tucking her legs beneath her. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked, gently sensing the weight behind his words. He joined her, his elbows resting on his knees. "I don't know what to expect," he admitted. "Emma and we were close years ago. She was an artist, always sketching ideas for murals or galleries. I promised to help her open one, but life got in the way. Work, ambition, all of it. Then she was gone." His voice cracked just slightly, and he looked away toward the city lights beyond the window. Nikki reached out her hand, resting lightly on his arm. "You don't have to go through this alone," she said. "If you want me there, I'll come with you." He turned to her, his eyes searching. "You'd do that?" "Of course," she said, her voice steady. "We're in this together." Remember, the next evening they stood outside a brownstone in Brooklyn, the street quiet except for the rustle of autumn leaves. Christopher's hand was steady as he rang the bell, but Nikki noticed the way his fingers flexed, a small sign of nerves. She stood close, her presence a quiet anchor. The door opened, revealing Lily, a woman with sharp eyes and a weary smile, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. "Christopher," Lily said, her voice soft but warm. "Thank you for coming." Her gaze shifted to Nikki. "You must be Nikki. I'm glad you're here." Inside, the house felt like a time capsule with framed sketches lining the walls and a faint scent of lavender lingering. Lily led them to a small living room where a wooden box sat on a coffee table, its surface worn but polished. "Emma left this for you," Lily said, her voice catching. "She made me promise to give it to you when I thought you were ready to move on." Christopher sat, his hands hovering over the box before opening it. Inside was a folded letter, a small brass key, and a sketch of a storefront with Emma's gallery, written in her looping handwriting. He unfolded the letter, his breath shallow, and began to read silently. Nikki watched his expression shift, pain, then something softer like relief. When he finished, he passed the letter to Nikki without a word. Her eyes scanned the words, "Christopher, you always carried too much guilt. I loved you for your heart, not your promises. This key is for the gallery we dreamed of. Open it not for me, but for you, for the life you're still living. Find someone who makes your world brighter, and don't let go. Emma." Nikki's eyes stung, but she smiled, handing the letter back. "She wanted you to keep going," she said softly. Christopher nodded, his voice rough. "She always saw the best in me, even when I didn't." He looked at Nikki, his gaze steady. You do that too. Lily watched them, her expression softening. She'd be happy, she said, seeing you like this. As they left the brownstone, the key heavy in Christopher's pocket, Nikki slipped her hand into his. The city hummed around them, but in that moment, it was just them two people choosing to carry forward, not alone, but together. The crisp New York autumn air carried the scent of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor, as Nikki and Christopher walked through a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone street where a small storefront stood, its windows boarded up, but framed with potential. The brass key from Emma's letter rested in Christopher's pocket, a tangible link to a dream he'd once shared with her, a gallery that never came to be. Now standing here with Nikki, he saw not just a memory, but a chance to create something new. Nikki adjusted the scarf around her neck, her breath visible in the cool air. So this is it, she asked, her eyes tracing the faded sign above the door, its letters barely legible. Emma's gallery. Christopher nodded, his fingers brushing the key. I bought it years ago, thinking we'd turn it into something special. After she was gone, I couldn't bring myself to do anything with it. He paused, his gaze distant. Until now. Nikki stepped closer, her shoulder brushing his. What do you want it to be? She asked, her voice gentle but curious. Not just for her, but for you. For us. He turned to her, a spark of determination in his eyes. A place where people can feel something, art, music, stories. Not a business, not a status symbol. Just a space for being. He hesitated, then added, I want you to be part of it, Nikki, if you're up for it. Her heart lifted, not just at the invitation, but at the way he saw her, as a partner, not a bystander. I'm in, she said, her smile warm. But it's got to have a poetry corner. Deal. He laughed, the sound easing the weight of the moment. Deal. Over the next few weeks, the storefront became their shared project, a refuge from the office's lingering scrutiny. Whitewave Enterprises had settled into a new rhythm. Christopher now worked with the strategic planning team, while Nikki reported to a new manager, Elena, whose brisk efficiency left little room for gossip. The whispers about their relationship had faded, replaced by cautious respect, as Nikki continued to excel in her work. But it was the evenings spent at the storefront that felt like their truest moments. They stripped peeling paint from the walls, revealing warm brick beneath. Nikki hung string lights, their soft glow transforming the space into something inviting. Christopher sanded old wooden beams, his sleeves rolled up, a smudge of dust on his cheek. They debated names over takeout pizza, settling on The Haven, simple, honest, a nod to the sanctuary they'd found in each other. Nikki curated a corner for poetry readings, stacking shelves with books she'd loved as a teenager, while Christopher installed a small stage for local musicians, inspired by the jazz clubs Nikki had described from her past. One evening, as they sat on the floor surrounded by paint cans and half-assembled shelves, Nikki opened a notebook she'd brought from home. I wrote something, she said, her voice tentative. First poem in years. Want to hear it? Christopher set down his paint roller, wiping his hands on a rag. Absolutely, he said, his eyes steady, encouraging. She took a breath, her fingers trembling slightly as she read, In the quiet, I found a door. Not locked, not barred, but waiting. For hands brave enough to turn the key and step into a room called now. The words spilled out raw and unpolished, but they carried the weight of her journey from a past that had held her back to a present that felt alive. Christopher listened, his expression soft but focused. When she finished, he didn't speak right away, letting the words settle. That's beautiful, he said finally. It's you, brave, real, finding your way. Nikki's cheeks warmed, but she didn't look away. "It's us," she corrected, her voice soft. "This place, this moment, it's what we're building." He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I like that," he said. "Us." The Haven's opening night arrived a month later, a modest event with fairy lights twinkling against the brick walls, and a small crowd of friends, local artists, and curious neighbors. Nikki wore a flowing blouse, her hair loose, as she greeted guests, her smile genuine, but tinged with nerves. Christopher stood by the stage introducing a guitarist, whose melodies filled the space with warmth. The poetry corner held a stack of notebooks for anyone to scribble their thoughts, and a table offered mismatched mugs of tea and homemade cookies. As the evening unfolded, Nikki caught Christopher's eye across the room. He raised his mug in a silent toast, and she returned the gesture, her heart full. This wasn't just a gallery. It was a testament to their choice to build something together, despite the risks. A woman approached Nikki, her eyes bright. "This place feels like home," she said, clutching a notebook where she'd written a poem. Nikki nodded, her throat tight, knowing exactly what she meant. Later, as the crowd thinned, Nikki and Christopher stood by the window, the city's lights a soft backdrop. "We did it," she said, her voice a mix of pride and wonder. "This is real." He slipped an arm around her waist, his touch light but sure. "It's more than I imagined," he said. "Because of you." She leaned into him, the warmth of his presence grounding her, but her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the moment. She glanced at the screen, a message from an old colleague, someone she hadn't spoken to in months. "Heard about you and White. Be careful. People don't forget." The words stung, a reminder of the world beyond the Haven's walls. Christopher noticed her expression, his brow furrowing. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, then showed him the message. "Just a reminder that the office hasn't let go of us," she said, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. He read the text, his jaw tightening briefly before he handed the phone back. "They can say what they want," he said. What we have here, what we're building, it's ours, not theirs." Nikki nodded, slipping the phone back into her pocket. "I know," she said. "But sometimes I wonder if we'll ever outrun the noise." He turned to her, his eyes fierce with conviction. "We don't have to outrun it. We just have to keep choosing this us every day." Her chest warmed, the doubt easing under the weight of his words. She reached for his hand, her fingers lacing through his. "Then we keep choosing," she said, her smile returning. "Every day." As they locked up the Haven, the night air cool against their skin, Nikki felt a quiet certainty settle in her bones. The world would always have its opinions, its whispers. But this space, their space, was proof that they could build something stronger. And as they walked into the Brooklyn night hand in hand, she knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Snow dusted the Brooklyn streets, settling softly on the windows of the Haven, where warm light spilled out into the winter evening. Inside, the space hummed with life, laughter, the clink of mugs, and the soft strum of a guitar from the small stage. Nikki adjusted a stack of hand-painted cards on a donation table, each one a contribution from local artists for a winter charity event. The Haven had become more than a gallery in the months since its opening. It was a gathering place, a sanctuary for stories and dreams, much like the one she and Christopher had found in each other. She wore a knit sweater, its deep blue threads catching the glow of the string lights, and her smile was easy, unguarded, as she greeted familiar faces. Christopher stood near the stage, chatting with a young musician who'd just finished a set. His usual tailored demeanor was softened by a wool scarf and a relaxed posture, a far cry from the CEO, who once seemed untouchable. He caught Nikki's eye across the room and raised a hand, a quiet gesture that felt like a shared secret. The haven was their creation, born from a key and a promise, but it had grown into something bigger, a testament to their choice to build a life together, no matter the obstacles. The past months hadn't been without challenges. The office had settled with Christopher fully transitioned to strategic planning, and Nikki thriving under her new manager, but occasional sidelong glances still lingered from colleagues who hadn't forgotten the rumors. Nikki had learned to let them slide, focusing instead on her work, and the evenings spent with Christopher, whether painting walls at the Haven or sharing late-night takeout on his couch. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was honest, grounded in the choice to face each day side by side. Tonight, the Haven was hosting a fundraiser for a local youth arts program, a cause Nikki had championed after seeing kids scribble poems in the corner she'd designed. A girl no older than 10 tugged at Nikki's sleeve, her eyes bright with excitement. "Can I read my poem later?" she asked, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. Nikki knelt, her smile warm. "Of course, Maya. You pick the time, and we'll make space for you." The girl beamed and darted off, leaving Nikki with a swell of pride. This was what the Haven was, for moments that made people feel seen. As the evening unfolded, Christopher took the stage, his voice steady as he introduced the event. "This place," he said, gesturing to the brick walls and mismatched chairs, "started as a dream that wasn't mine alone. It's a space for stories, for healing, for starting over. Thank you for being part of it." His eyes found Nikki's, and she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the crowded room. After the speeches, Maya took the stage, her small voice trembling but clear as she read her poem about a bird finding its wings. The room fell silent, then erupted in applause, and Nikki clapped hardest, her eyes stinging. She glanced at Christopher, who was watching her with a quiet intensity, as if he saw the same spark in her that she felt in Maya's words. Later, as guests mingled, Nikki slipped outside to the small courtyard behind the Haven, where a single lantern cast a soft glow. The snow fell gently, dusting her shoulders, and she closed her eyes, letting the quiet settle over her. The past year had been a journey from a hotel mix-up in Nha Trang to this moment, where she stood in a life she'd chosen, not one she'd settled for. She heard footsteps and turned to find Christopher, his scarf loose, his breath visible in the cold. Escaping the crowd, he teased, stepping closer. "Just needed a second," she said, smiling. "It's a lot seeing this place come alive." He nodded, his gaze softening. "You made this happen, Nikki. Not just the space, but the feeling in it. You make people feel like they belong." Her heart swelled, his words landing with the weight of truth. "We made it happen," she corrected, reaching for his hand. "This is ours." He squeezed her hand, his touch steady. "I was thinking," he said, his voice low, "about what comes next. Not just the Haven, but us. I want to keep building this with you." Nikki's breath caught, not from surprise, but from the clarity of his words. She'd spent so long guarding herself, afraid of losing what she'd worked for. But standing here with snowflakes melting on her lashes, she felt no fear. "I want that too," she said, her voice firm. "Not just here, but everywhere. Messy mornings, quiet nights, all of it." He smiled, a slow, genuine curve that made the cold night feel warm. "Then let's do it. No holding back." They stood there, hands clasped, the snow falling around them, like a quiet promise. The Haven's music drifted through the open door, a soft melody that felt like an echo of their story, unplanned, imperfect, but true. Nikki leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, and for a moment, the world was just them, steady in the swirl of winter. As the event wound down, They returned inside to clean up stacking mugs and folding chairs. Maya ran up, thrusting her poem into Nikki's hands. "Keep this," she said, her grin wide, "so you remember me." Nikki tucked the paper into her pocket, her heart full. "I'll never forget," she said, and meant it. When the last guest left, Christopher locked the door, the jingle of keys a familiar sound. They stood in the empty space, the lights dim, the air still warm with the night's energy. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" Nikki asked, leaning against the Poetry Corner's bookshelf. One wrong room, and everything changed. Christopher crossed the room, stopping in front of her. "I don't think it was wrong," he said, his voice soft. "I think it was exactly what we needed." He reached for her, his hands framing her face, and kissed her gently, a kiss that spoke of trust, not urgency. She kissed him back, her fingers curling into his scarf, and felt a certainty she hadn't known was possible. This wasn't the end of their story, but a beginning, one they'd write together line by line. As they stepped out into the snowy night, the haven's sign glowing faintly behind them, Nikki looked at Christopher, his eyes bright against the cold. Ready for the next chapter, she asked, her voice light but sure. He slipped his arm around her, pulling her close. "With you always." The snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in quiet, and as they walked down the street, their footsteps side by side, Nikki knew this was home, not a place, but a feeling built on the courage to choose each other every day.